Okay.
You're all set now, huh?
I think we might be. I think we're live.
We're live. Saturday Night Live.
I think we are live.
Good.
All right. You see? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going live. It always takes a minute for it to...
Sure, to juice up.
Yeah, well, it's got to make it through all those internet tubes.
Sure, sure.
Get to where it needs to go. Okay. I think it is going. Now the only other thing I'm going to try to do is see if I can send a quick message to the family back at home because they may want to watch.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah. So you give me one more minute and then I'll be...
You'll be connected with them then.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. I think this will work. Okay. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Well, it's trying. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't think the connection may not be good enough. But what I can do as a backup option is I can record us as well.
Okay, then you can record it.
Yep. Okay. So I think with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? So, Grandpa, I was thinking what you could do is maybe state your full name and your birth date,
okay,
and where you were born.
All right.
And then we can continue to talk and see where the conversation.
Carry on a normal conversation.
See where the conversation takes us. Yep.
Okay.
That's all. I just pretend none of my tools and technology is here.
Okay. Don't let that pressure override you.
Don't let it scare you, Grandpa.
No panic.
Okay.
Okay. All right, you want me to start talking now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, my name is John M. Learch. I was born in Owine, Iowa on April 27, 1926 at 6 p.m. in the evening.
At 6 p.m. in the evening?
Yeah,
I don't
so
even...
my mother tells me.
Okay. I don't even know if I remember what time I was born. I know the date. I remember that much.
Yeah. Okay.
That's impressive. Okay.
Do you want me to talk?
In where in Owine, Iowa. Where is Owine?
Owine, Iowa is a city of about 6,000 to 7,000 people. It's in Fayette County, Iowa, about 60 miles straight north of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Okay.
And 40 miles northwest of Waterloo, Iowa. And 70 miles east of Dubuque, Iowa.
Yeah.
Right up in the northeast corner of Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that. And how long did you guys live there?
I lived there for my first 21st years, really, after I went to grade school and high school there, and then I was inducted into the Army in 1945.
So before we go too far down that hole, because I know that there's a lot of really interesting things there, I thought I heard that your mother had a grocery store business?
Yes. My father died when my brother Bob and I were young children. I was 4 and Bob was 1.
Wow.
And this was in 1930, right at the start of the Depression, when the Depression came on. And my mother operated a grocery store in Owine. and she had a lot of very loyal customers and family and friendly neighbors and so on that gave her business, and that supported us all the time up until 1942 when she became ill. The year 1942 was kind of the start of World War II, and all the rationing that came in, and all the accounting she had to be responsible for ration stamps and giving credit to the customers and so on. And the rationing particularly, the whole work just became overwhelming to her, and she was doing it on her own. And it just kind of was overwhelming for her, and she had to give it up in 1942.
So she sold the grocery store?
Yeah, yeah. It kind of liquidated on itself.
Okay.
And Owine being a small town, there were not a lot of buyers or anything like that. It just kind of liquidated on its own. And we had, it was even so far overwhelming that she had to be hospitalized for a while. It was that much of a pressure on her. For about 6 weeks, I remember, she was down in Iowa City at the State University of Iowa Hospital for a period of a few months to get herself straightened out, and then she came back, and she was a very vibrant woman and so on.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what did she do after the grocery store was sold?
Well, I was finishing high school. That was 1942, and I graduated from high school in 1944. And in that period of 42 to 44 and to 45, we were living with our grandmother, my mother's mother, Grandma Cran.
Okay.
Yeah, and we lived at her house.
And that was still in Owine?
Yeah, that was still in Owine, yeah, till I finished high school. Then I took a job after high school working on the railroad.
Working on the railroad? I don't know if I ever heard this.
Yes, it was. I was working on the railroad.
Oh, did you work on the railroad all the livelong day?
All the livelong day. Yeah. Casey Jones coming down the rail. But anyway, I worked in a railroad storeroom. Owine was kind of a railroad center, a central junction point for the Chicago Great Western Railroad, and I worked in what we called the storeroom, and I had to fill express orders for all the station agents around the system, because the storeroom had the supplies that they would need and so on. And I would gather up those supplies and package them, and then take them up to the railroad depot where the trains came in, and had them all labeled and so on where these packages were to go all around the system. And the railroad,
so you had like specific cars that you would have to put them in so that they would get to the right destination?
No, yeah, I did, yeah. We'd have specific cars. Owine was the center point for that railroad. And that railroad out of Owine ran to St. Paul, Minnesota on the north, Omaha, Nebraska on the west, and Kansas City to the south, and Chicago to the east. And it was right in the center of that railroad. And this was in all their storerooms and everything right there in Owine.
And this was in Owine?
Yes.
Wow.
It was Owine's biggest employer, the railroad, at that day.
Yeah.
In those days, yeah. And I took it in the storeroom, and met all the demands for packaging and supplies that all these station agents along the system needed. Even up to 100-pound ice blocks that the section gang would want. It was a hot summertime, you know. They wanted cold water, and we would ship out cakes of ice to them within a radius, you know.
How would they ship those out? Did you put them in you put them in a container or something?
Yeah,
right?
no, well, not really.
No?
It's odd the way that happened, but I know I would go to our ice house and just take a pair of ice tongs and grab a big chunk of ice and bring it on a baggage wagon, get it up there, and put it on an elevator first, and then bring it up to the baggage room height, and then pull that over to the baggage room, and then take it up to the train that was going to go to the destination that these workers were, and I'd have to load that cake of ice onto the baggage car, and by the time it got there, I don't know if it melted away or not, but they had some ice. This was hot summertime in 42, 4 and 45.
Hey, your job wasn't to make sure that they actually got the ice, it was to load the ice, load the ice on the car.
Yeah, and the devil take the hindmost. Yeah, that was it. But I did that up until I was drafted into the Army.
Okay, okay. So, what about, so I saw a note here from my mom that you spent some summers with Maine and Joe?
Yes.
On their farm?
Yes.
Where was their farm at?
Their farm was south of a little town in Iowa called Fairbank, F-A-I-R-B-A-N-K.
Okay.
Fairbank, Iowa, and it was a town of about 600 to 700 people, and Fairbank was about 9 miles from Owine.
Okay.
And my Uncle Joe and Aunt Mame had a farm 3 miles south of Fairbank, and they were on their farm in the summertime and did farm chores and things like that. We milked cows and
what was your youngest age that you remember doing farm chores?
I was probably about 1935. I remember when they bought that new car. I was 9 years old.
9, yeah.
9 years old, yeah. And they did that up to the time I could carry a paper route. And then I got a paper route in Owine there and delivered papers for money. I had to be making some kind of money all my life. Yeah. My mother was pretty poor in those days. So she was a single mom and she had to give up her store, and we didn't have a lot of resources, so I always had to be doing something that brought in some money, a paycheck.
Well, it's also pretty impressive that you were still able to find work and find some income during that depression.
Right, they were
era.
You bet, they were years of where a lot of people were living in poverty, and I remember people used to get receipts from the county government in Iowa there. To be able to take those receipts to a grocery store and be able to buy their groceries, and then the grocer would just take those receipts to the bank and get cash for them. And there was a lot of unemployment in those days. People did not have jobs, no jobs at all. And my mother had probably one of the few telephones on the block in Owine there, and it was a railroad town. And different people would come over to use her phone to call up the railroad offices to see if anybody laid off or was sick or didn't come to work, so their husband would be able to come to work that day. And they were just kind of the side employees for the railroad. And if somebody was on vacation or took a vacation, maybe one of the neighbor people could fill his job while he was gone or something like that. They were tough days. People didn't have jobs, John. They didn't have jobs at all. And they would get assistance from the county, would allow grocery credits and so on, so they could get food and buy food with those grocery credits.
So how did do you know how the grocery credits worked? The county would give them something, they would take it to the store, and then the store gets reimbursed by the county?
Yeah,
basically?
yeah, what would happen is that these people would apply to the county for food subsistence. And they would issue a voucher that would be valued at, say, $20 or $30 or something, a denomination thing. And then they take that voucher to the grocery store, and the grocery store would let them buy groceries up to that amount. And then the grocer took the receipts to the bank, and the bank redeemed the receipts, and then of course the bank turned them over to the county for their money.
Right.
So, and that's kind of the way the system worked.
Wow.
It was complex, but it was necessary in those days because a lot of people just didn't have jobs at all. You know, if a working man in those days earned $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 a day, that was something in that little town. And there was people that just earned about that kind of money. Unemployment was a big, big problem. Now, people that worked on the railroad, in the shops and that were conductors and brakemen and engineers and things like that, their pay was probably about, you know, $8 to $10 a day, but they only worked a 40-hour week, so that was kind of. They were the better jobs in that town at that time.
Yeah.
But the regular merchants that ran the grocery stores and the clothing stores and the hardware stores and so on, their employees didn't begin to make that kind of money.
Yeah. It's amazing that, you know, people were able to survive and get through at that time.
Yes, it was. Yeah, we really did. I mean, you know, but everybody grew a garden, John, in those days. In the spring of the year, April and May, they'd be spading up a spot in their yard, and they would be planting potatoes and tomato plants and peas and beans and things like that, and that would supplement a lot of their food costs and so on. And then if you were lucky enough to be on an acreage outside of town, which a lot of people were, if you had a couple of acres of ground, they might even have chickens for eggs and food, and a much larger garden and so on. And they might even have an animal.
Some livestock or something.
Yeah, they might have a cow or two for milk or something like that. There were all kinds of those situations.
And your Aunt Mame and Uncle Joe, they had some chickens at least, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, they had chickens regularly, and we would gather eggs every day, and we always had plenty of eggs and things like that. And then they'd have chicken dinners and that sort of thing. I never liked chicken because I hated to pick the chickens.
And when you say pig chicken, just for the right frame of reference here, you're talking
Exactly.
about this is the one that's going to become the dinner.
That's
and
right.
I have to pick him up.
Exactly
And
right. You'd have to go and corner that chicken and get him and chop his head off, and then.
that is a really interesting thing about society these days, is that
bet.
we're a little bit less connected to that food
Kids
source,
don't
right?
realize where their food comes from.
Right. Well, they do. It comes from the grocery store.
Yeah, but before that, where did the grocery store get it? Yeah.
But they didn't have to go to the yard and grab that chicken to turn it into a dinner.
Yeah, that's right. And we used to do that. You'd grab that chicken and cut its head off and soak it in boiling water and get all the feathers off of it and so on. And then you'd have to gut it, and then it was ready to be put into the frying pan. I remember my Aunt Mame used to take all the chicken meat and dip it in flour and so on, so it would be nice and tasty and crickly and crackly and so on. And but I never liked chicken, and I think that's the biggest reason. I was always a beef guy.
You never had to kill your own cow.
I never had to kill a steer or a cow. Yeah, that's right.
So what is this? I'm looking at my notes here. You had cousins living upstairs
Right.
in your house too?
Yeah.
This is when you were still growing up then?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it was the Reen family, that's R-E-E-N, and there were 7 Reen children, and they lived over in Rockford, Illinois, and their father just couldn't get work or anything like that, and he couldn't support his family. And so my mother had the Reen family move to Owine. And so the Reens, with their 7 children, moved to Owine and took over our upstairs of our 2-story home.
Now, was your home separate from the grocery store?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it was a room in the grocery, it was a room in our home. The grocery store was an actual room in our home.
Do you remember how big it was? Like, was it
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
size maybe?
Yeah, it wasn't much bigger than this room you're sitting in. There were shelves all along the walls and so on to store canned goods and display canned goods and to display like oranges and apples and, you know, things like that.
So
And
you
they
had
had a big refrigerator for butter and milk and dairy products. We had a huge refrigerator for that, and so people could come and they'd be able to buy canned goods and dairy products, butter, milk, cheese, cold meat. My mother used to sell cold meats and so on.
So you had a grocery store and 2 families all in the same.
In that house, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, those were rough Depression years. Yeah, my mother was a good businesswoman. She really was. She was a good businesswoman, and everybody liked her. And she could talk with anybody, and she just had a real good personality. Before she married, she was a school teacher, and so were a couple of my other aunts, Mrs. Reen, and we used to call her Aunt Noni Cusack, and my mother. All 3 of those were school teachers, and they went to college over at Iowa State Teachers College in Cedar Falls, and so they taught in the country schools around Owine before they married and so on. And but once that you know, that part of their life was over and they settled into real life, Mrs. Reen married and had this big family, and the father just couldn't support them at all.
What do you remember about those cousins coming in and living with you? I mean, as kids, did you enjoy that you had more kids around that you could play with,
Yeah.
or did it just make things a little more difficult?
No, it was fun. It was really something. The Reen kids they were all nice kids, and there were 5 girls and 2 boys, and one of the boys was my age. He was 6 months older than me even. So we were always in the same grades at school and so on, and competing with each other through school. And then the younger Reen boy, Bobby Reen, I always remember what a sad day that was. In 1936, on November 9th, I'll never forget the day. It was a Monday morning, and we had the first snowfall of the season. And Bobby Reen, we were outside for recess at Sacred Heart School about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we were playing ball and everything like that. And it was the first snowfall. It was kind of dampish and slippery and, you know, all that sort of thing. And the ball went into the street, and Bobby Reen ran out to get the ball, and a truck came along and ran right over him.
Oh.
And that was one of the saddest days of my life. It really was, because I was more closely associated with him than any of the other Reen kids. But they were rushed him to the hospital and so on, and he died about 6 o'clock that night. And I always remember that day, November 9th, 1936, that he died, and after being run over at school by a truck. And it was a sad, sad day. And that was, and then the Marines, you know, they had nothing. They were living upstairs at our house there. And my mother had to arrange for all the funeral and all that sort of thing. And my mother had a family plot from where we buried my father, and we had to bury Bobby Green in that family plot. And that's where he was till the Reams were able to get on their feet and buy burial grounds on their own in the cemetery there.
Are there those plots still there today?
Oh yes, they're still there today. Every time I go back there, I visit them.
In Owine?
Yeah. Yeah, right there. And all my relatives on my mother's side are buried out there, and they were all very close aunts and uncles, cousins, and everything. And I go visit those graves every time I go to Owine. And you have just a lot of memories when you walk through there.
I can imagine.
As a little kid, yeah.
Huh. Well, it's such an interesting life. So you go to high school, and then did you go to college and then go into the military, or was it military first?
I'll tell you what. We were living with Grandma Crayan when I was in my last 2 years of my high school, and I went to work on the railroad that we were talking about, you know. And that was a decent paycheck, and I would give all the money to my mother. And then I was eventually drafted into the Army in April of 1945. And we were still living up at Grandma Crayan's house. But anyway, I had to go to the Army, and I was inducted in the Army on April 4th, 1945, in Fort Snelling, Minnesota. And a private's pay in those days was $50. That's all the private got, and that's what I was. And I would go up to the paymaster every payday once a month, and I'd get $12.75 for my month's pay, and all the rest of the money went to my mother. And I took basic training in Camp Livingston, Louisiana, and all the guys would be able to go out on Saturday night and everything, you know, and I'd be sitting in the barracks with my $12.75. You couldn't do much with that even in those days.
So what did you do to pass the time then, since you weren't going out with
they had PXs, you know, post exchanges they called them, and you could go there and they would have you know, some kind of entertainment, you know, maybe local people
like a local musician or something.
Musicians would come there and so on. And then they had theaters on the post, on the Army post.
Oh, okay.
And they would have the latest movies and all that sort of thing, and you could go to the movie and just things like that. So I never went off the post very much when I was in basic training. I was just...
And how long was basic back then?
17 weeks. It was over 4 months.
Yeah.
And
then what was your I don't know back then if they just had, you know, infantrymen or tankmen or anything like that.
Well,
but
I was an infantry soldier, and
okay.
We were being prepared for the land invasion of Japan. There's no question about that. And they would have us out in the middle of the night, total darkness, crawling on our bellies with our rifles. I still remember my rifle serial number.
I should have asked you.
3600.
I should have asked you that. Did you name your rifle, or is that only in the Marines?
That was in the infantry, yeah.
Okay.
No, I never named it.
You didn't know
I remember I had an easy number to remember, and I still remember it to this day. You always had to remember your Army serial number, and your rifle number. And my rifle number was 121-3600, and and my Army serial number was 377933173. Those two numbers you really had to know all the time. But we, in Army basic training, they put us through all the steps of firing and using all the weapons, like the Army M1 rifle, the machine gun. You had to know how to operate the machine gun. We had a weapon that they called the bazooka. You had to know how to use a bazooka. And then I'm trying to think of the one where
you put it in the tube, the mortar?
And, yeah, you'd throw the shell down into the tube and it would blast right off in front of you. We had to be acquainted and know how to use all those weapons.
And your primary was the M1?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The M1 rifle. That was the one you always, that was your bride and groom. The M1 rifle.
Now, when I was a younger man, you had the famous story of the mortar.
Yes.
You remember? Do you know the story I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
I don't think we can get away with this interview without hearing this story, Grandpa.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one day we were out firing a mortar, and you had two men that manned the mortar. One guy was just sitting down at the plate, being sure the tube was in place, and the other guy that would throw the shell down into the tube to fire off. And this one.
And maybe just for explanation, really quick, in case somebody's not aware, I believe the way those mortars fire is they have a device at the bottom of it.
A shell, yeah.
So when the mortar hits the bottom plate of that tube, it then ignites and fires.
Fires it off. Yes. Yeah, that's what happens. And this particular day that we were doing mortar practice, I was throwing the device down into the tube.
Yeah. And how long were those tubes? They were about maybe a couple feet or so?
Yeah, they weren't very long. They were maybe about 2.5 feet long, and they fit in the base of the tube fit into a plate, a metal plate at the ground, and it was bolted in. Okay. So there would always be a percussion when that thing would fire off, but that plate would hold that tube in place.
Okay.
And this particular day, as we were firing a mortar, and you were always told, never stand up when you're firing a mortar. Never stand up. And so anyway, we were doing it that day, and I remember throwing down the shell into that tube, and the doggone thing didn't go off. And geez, we stood there and waited, and it didn't go off and didn't go off, and like a dummy, I stood up. And the minute I stood up, that thing went right by my nose. I had to change shorts, John.
You weren't wearing your brown pants that day, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you were wearing your whites.
Yeah. When the thing just went right off right in front of my face. If I'd have been another 6 inches over, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. And that thing just went right off on me. But that's one thing they always told you, never stand up when you're firing a mortar, because those things happen.
It seems like that's a very precarious device to be trained on, because if it doesn't fire off, I think what I always heard is that they tell you to unscrew the bottom and let the shell drop out. But the thing is that could still be a live shell at that point.
You never know.
Even
it's
if you
a very
let it...
risky procedure. Yeah. What you're supposed to do is unscrew the base down there and gently lift the tube up and lift it up and let gravity eventually let the shell come out that's unfired. And
right.
I just stood up, and which was against the rules. I should have never done that. But fortunately, I lived to talk about it.
Did you get yelled at?
I sure did.
Reprimanded for that?
I got reprimanded very much for that.
And I bet that was the last time you ever did that.
Yeah, you bet. Fortunately, I never had to use that in the real thing. But that was really something. That was probably the closest to death I ever came. Because that thing would have blasted right through me if I'd have been over 6 more inches.
And I'm assuming that that's probably one of the more one of the more challenging encounters that you had in basic. Like, I'm assuming you didn't have any other events where you thought that you were in danger or anything like that.
Yeah, well, that was probably the closest that encounter I ever had. But they would have us out crawling under live machine gun fire at night.
Hmm.
And you could see tracer bullets, and you would be crawling on your belly with your rifle, and those things would you'd hear zing, zing, zing right over your head, and every once in a while there'd be a lighted tracer, and boy, oh boy, the soldiers would be out, or the cadre that trained us would be out on the sidelines when we were crawling under there, and they keep yelling constantly, "Keep your head down, keep your head down." And you'd have your steel helmet on, and boy, you'd have your nose right down into the dirt crawling. and that was one of the more difficult procedures. Wow. That was being prepared for the land invasion of Japan. I'd have been in on that without the atom bomb. It hadn't been for the atom bomb.
So let's talk about that really quick, because that is another story that I remember you saying, is that you went through basic, and then if I remember it correctly, you were actually on your way across. And back then they had to put you in rail cars, right, and get you to the coast. Right. And then once they got you to the coast, they had to put you on boats and get you on the ocean. Right. So it was a very long journey to get over there.
Very much long. Yeah. As a matter of fact, after our basic training, the war was over. The last day of my basic training was VJ Day, so the war was over, and they didn't know what to do with all these soldiers, and we were finished with our basic training. So they gave us a delay en route where I could go back to Owine. That's the last time I saw my mothers, when we went back to Owine there, and then they were reassigning us to 9 weeks of advanced infantry training in Fort Rucker, Alabama. Mm-hmm. So I go down to Fort Rucker after that delay en route. You had about 2 weeks to get there, so that allowed you to go back to your home for a few days and visit all of your relatives, and then return to Fort Rucker.
And so, just to clarify, you actually, they dropped the bomb when you were still in basic?
Yeah, okay. The bomb dropped when I was in basic. It was in August of '45.
Wow. Okay.
And we were completing our basic training right at that time, right in August of '45.
It kind of sounds like you're a man of timing, Grandpa.
Yeah, I certainly was.
You were 6 inches away from the mortar.
Earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
I had close encounters of the third kind, or whatever they call it.
So now you make your way down to Alabama for advanced training.
Yeah, we were going to have advanced infantry training, and we weren't there hardly 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And it's hotter than heck. It's in early September, and it was hot. And they took away all our summer clothing and gave us wool OD clothing, olive drab. That was what it was called. OD was olive drab, and it was heavy wool clothing. And you had to wear those for a couple of days, and it was just hotter and so uncomfortable. Oh my God, can you think of walking around that heavy wool stuff? But anyway, we did. And then they put us on a troop train in Camp Rucker, and they were shipping us to Camp Adair, Oregon. That's crisscrossing the United States from the southeast to the northwest. And we were on that train for 6 days, going through all these little towns. The damn train would sidetrack for everything that was coming down the rails. We were low priority. So, and the train was probably about I would say 20 cars or something of soldiers. And there was a chow car, the dining car, right in the middle of it. And 3 times a day, we'd have to go through all these cars up to the chow car to get our food and then return to where our assigned car was needed. And while the train was moving, you know, you're going up there getting your food. And
try not to spill it.
Yeah. And so we did that for 6 days.
Wow.
The train went up to St. Louis and then on out to Denver and then up to Boise, Idaho, and then over to Portland, Oregon, and we were just south of Camp Adair, Oregon, and we stayed there for about 3 weeks. And then they put us on another train to go up to Seattle, Fort Lawton, Seattle. And we got to Fort Lawton, and we could just tell we were getting prepared to be shipped overseas. And right before we were being ready to be shipped overseas, they called us out in a formation, and they said that if any soldier enlists for a year's service from this day forward, would get a week's furlough to return to his home and enjoy a week and then be reassigned. Or you can get on the ship and you're going over to Japan. And I thought, I'm not...
So this is like you're going over...
It was a choice to make, yeah.
But you're going over to Japan for post-World War II efforts to help...
Occupation duty, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, I said, well, I never volunteered for anything yet, and I'm not going to volunteer for this. I'll take my chances and go over to Japan. So I had a choice. I could go sign up for an extra year, and I said, I don't know what I'll be over there for, whether it be a year or 5 years or what, but anyway, I'll take my chances. And
so then if the plan was to have you over there for, or in the Army for 3 years, what they were saying is, we'll add another year to that, so you're committed to 4 years with us, basically.
Yeah, that's kind of about what it amounted to, yeah.
So you
but
took
anyway,
your
I
chances.
didn't sign up for it, because I was just home. I mean, you know, I returned to Alabama, but 6 weeks ago I was just on my furlough home anyway. So anyway, we went on to Japan, and
then you had to take the boat. You were on a boat and you were sent
Right.
over, right?
yeah.
Do you remember how long that trip was?
Yeah, it was about 29 days.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long trip. You kind of tell the Army really didn't know what to do with you. The war was over, you know.
Right.
You were there, and it just seemed like, well, we don't know what in the world to do with them, but we'll put them on a boat and they can, we'll keep them guessing. So,
at least make them think we know.
yeah, that's right. At least we think we know. But anyway, this little boat that we were on, there's only about 1,200 guys on it. It wasn't a very big boat. The Cape Victory was the name of it, Cape Victory. And
do you remember what kind of boat it was?
yeah, it was one manufactured for the Navy for troop transport,
Okay.
and thing like that, and it carried about 1,200 soldiers. It
So
was not a big ship.
It wasn't an aircraft carrier.
No, it wasn't anything like that. It was, yeah.
Did it even have any heavy equipment, or it was just pure personnel?
It was pure personnel.
Okay.
Yeah. We, down in the holds, you slept in bunks about 5 high. The first, and there'd be about, the bunks would be bolted onto a center post and so on. And you slept in those kind of bunks that were attached to a big pillar and so on.
Yeah.
And they were about 5 high. And that's where you spent your time. And some guys were seasick the whole trip.
Oh, oh my gosh.
It was a mess. It was the dirtiest mess I was ever in.
Did you get seasick?
Well, I tell you what, I was seasick the one day, and I always remember the first day out of Seattle, everybody was just heaving up over the sides of it. The ship was a mess. You go down into the hold, you know, and they had these iron pipe rails to hang on to, and your hand would just slide down. Everything was just a mess and stunk like hell.
Oh.
But anyway, the way I got over my seasickness is this. I was out there throwing up like everybody else, and this medic walks up to me, and he was in the Navy. These ships were manned by U.S. Navy.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "I'll tell you how to get over it." He says, "I'll give you a couple of tablets," but he says, "the way you want to get over it," he said, "is just concentrate on regulating your breathing with the pitch of the ship."
Ah.
And he'd say, "Now, when the ship goes down, inhale, and as it comes up on the other side, exhale." And he said, "Just concentrate on your breathing with that rhythm." And he says, "You'll get over your seasickness." And I did that, and I wasn't seasick
Wow.
another day. Yeah, but some guys were sick the whole damn trip.
My wife and I do horrible on boats. You may have just saved us, Grandpa.
Yeah. But I wasn't seasick for the rest of the trip. I just handled it well, and some guys were just, they couldn't go to bed without having their steel helmet beside them, you know. They'd heave up and into their steel helmet, you know. And it was just really a mess.
Oh, man.
But fortunately, I guess I found the secret for that just from that one sailor that told me how to do it, and I wasn't seasick at all after that one day.
Hopefully you bought him a candy bar or
Yeah, I
something.
sure did, yeah. Oh, I tell you what, the biggest treat on the whole trip was we left Seattle right in apple season time.
Ah.
And the ship had on a big shipment of apples, and they were delicious apples, and they would give us an apple every afternoon on that trip going over there, and everybody's waiting around to get an apple. Could you believe that? And that apple was just such a great treat, you know. It was like having an ice cream soda.
You probably never got anything like that, you know, while you were in basic.
Yeah, we didn't.
Yeah.
But these apples were just delicious, you know.
I can imagine.
And it was just a real treat to get that apple every single day. And one day we were in a typhoon going across there.
Wow.
And everybody was voted, you know, informed they had to stay in the hold. You couldn't go out on deck or anything. And God, I remember seeing that. The winds were just enormous. And the wind would come along and blow a hole in that ocean. It looked like a 40-story building could fit in. And the ship would just go down this way like that, and then up around like that. And God, guys were sick and everything. What they did was just turn the ship around because it couldn't go forward anymore, and that just have to wait that storm out.
Wow.
Till it blew across before you turned around and went forward again. And the ship just sat there like a cork on the ocean, like that, going up and down and up. And the guys were just in a mess with that.
Oh, man.
It was really something. But we eventually, well, the first place that we had to go to, we were ordered to, was Nagasaki. And that's where one of the atom bombs fell.
Yeah.
And everybody was anxious to see what kind of damage the bomb did.
So that was so from the ocean ride from Seattle, you immediately went there?
To Nagasaki, yeah. So we got down to Nagasaki, and it was just a nice, beautiful day and everything, and everybody was just clamoring to get off that ship, because we'd been on it for 3 weeks. And we were just clamoring to get off, and the ship just sat there in the bay there. And all at once a motor launch comes out with some high military official reordering us to Nagoya. So that was another 3-day trip from Nagasaki up to Nagoya. Nagasaki was on Kyushu Island, the southernmost island of Japan, and that was supposedly where we were supposed to be. but we were reordered to go up to Nagoya, which was on Honshu, the main island of Japan, where all the major cities are and so on. So we were on, it took another, wouldn't have taken 3 days, but they just didn't know what to do with you at the time. So they shipped us up to Nagoya.
They told the captains of the boat, just go out a little bit, do a few circles.
Yeah, and head up to Nagoya.
Kill some time.
Kill some time, that's exactly right. So we went up to Nagoya, and we got off the boat at Nagoya, and they put us in a replacement camp in outside of Nagoya, a town called Okazaki. And we were there in Okazaki waiting for assignment to some unit there. All the soldiers that were originally in Japan at that time were all World War II vets, had been through the whole war, you know, and they put them up there as occupation troops, and then we were to come there to replace those guys so they could ship back to the States and get discharged.
Right.
And so we went to Nagoya, and I was assigned to a regimental headquarters unit in Nagoya. Headquarters 252. My address was Headquarters Detachment 259th Ordnance Battalion, and so we set up an ordnance depot in Nagoya, outside of Nagoya, and had all the equipment brought in, trucks and tanks and all the military gear that you had to have, and we just had it right there at that ordnance depot.
And you used the word, the earlier occupation, but what did you see yourself as doing over there? And I know you said that, you know, it seemed like the Army was struggling to figure out what to do with you guys, but did you at least have some kind of sense of purpose, or you know, were you actually helping reconstruct homes and things? Or
yeah,
something?
well, we weren't doing that. We were just there to occupy. They didn't have us assigned to any particular duties. We were just there to occupy and keep order in Japan. That's all we were doing, because we didn't know how those people were going to react and accept us and all that sort of thing. We were the first occupation troops in Nagoya there, and the Japanese people turned out to be very friendly and most helpful and everything. They were, you know, they knew that, hey, we meant business, and they were there to help and assist us, and they did. They were most respectful of us. Japanese people were.
Did you ever get to meet any families or
Oh, yeah.
anyone when you were there?
Mm-hmm.
Were there any particular moments that stood out to you that you can still remember?
Well, not particularly. We used to, I was kind of a supply sergeant that distributed supplies to the troops here, and every soldier was entitled to a carton of cigarettes a week.
So not just a pack, but a carton.
Full carton.
Full carton of
10
packs.
packs to a carton, you know. And they were entitled to a bar of soap and a blanket. Of course, the blanket was permanent, but like, you know, a bar of soap a week and everything like that. And I would have to issue those supplies and to our unit there. And then another thing we were entitled to was they looked like they were liter bottles. They were 2-liter bottles, 2 liters to a bottle of Japanese beer. Everybody liked Japanese beer. It had a rice base in it and so on. And I'd have to go down to the Japanese brewery with the truck and get our unit's allotment of beer, and every soldier got 2 bottles of beer every
week.
Every week, yeah.
Okay.
And these just weren't like the bottles we have. They looked like they were kind of half-gallon bottles, like, you know,
So almost-
half-gallon milk is.
Almost like a small jug, kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah, that's right, that's what it was.
So they got 2 of them.
And 2 a week, yeah.
Wow.
So you couldn't drink it all at once.
Now, did you drink and smoke back then?
No, I didn't. But I tried to drink and smoke.
But you didn't like
I
it?
had my foot locker was backed up with cigarettes. So what we would do, we would jump in a Jeep on the weekends, on usually a Sunday, and we'd drive into the mountains, and the Japanese people would buy those cigarettes from us give us $20 a carton for them, which was a lot of money in those days. $20 a carton for cigarettes. And and I would sell all my cigarettes. God, I had more money in Japan than I knew what to do with. You couldn't spend it on anything. I carried my money around in a tobacco pouch. And there was Japanese money. I had so much yen, they called it.
Yeah.
And so we would do that every Sunday. And then this one little town that we would go to sell those cigarettes, some dumb American soldier one time unsealed the carton of cigarettes, just melted the wax on the end and kind of pulled out all the cigarettes, and then stuffed it with tissue paper, and then sealed it back up and sold it to some Japanese guy for $20. And when we went in and found that out, boy, we went into that town the next time, and they didn't want anything to do with us. They really got taken, you know.
One bad apple.
Yeah, one nut would do something like that. You had such a good thing going for you, but some nut has to, you know, try to beat the system, you know.
Right.
And he ruined it for everybody. So that's the last time we could go to that town. But the Japanese people were very friendly, and they would just do anything for you. And as a matter of fact, when we first got there, John, it was something terrible. Those people were starving to death. Well, not starving to death, but they were hungry. They didn't have adequate diet or anything there. And because they'd been bombed up, they used to tell me, they'd say, B-29, come every day, and bomb them, you know. That's it. Nagoya was such it was such an industrial city. It was a manufacturer of airplanes and tanks and everything. It was big. It was Japan's 3rd largest city. It was a big industrial center, manufactured war material.
It makes sense that's why the U.S. would.
Yeah. So it was a big target for.
Yeah.
And that's where we were. And it was just such a big center, and we would take our stuff into the little towns around there, and the Japanese people would buy it. But when we got there, the poor Japanese people didn't have anything. We had a big central mess hall where everybody on the base ate in this mess hall 3 times a day. And we had good food and everything, but you know, you wouldn't eat all of it. The light meat would be the fatty part of it, and all that sort of thing. And the Japanese people, before you would come out to wash out your mess gear and everything and put your stuff in the garbage, before you put it in the garbage, they just come and just beg you, could I take it? And they'd take their hands in your mess gear and put it in a little box, you know, and they'd eat your garbage that you wouldn't eat. Can you imagine that? But they did that before you could wash out your mess gear. And there was a lot of poverty among those people in those days. But they were, and I always remember the colonel at our headquarters unit hired a Japanese girl to be his secretary. And she was a real lady. She was just impeccable in dress and manners and everything. Very sophisticated. And her name was Michiko Kato. I remember Michiko Kato. And she was a pretty girl. And She would come to work every day dressed in her Japanese garb, you know, with the typical Japanese lady, what they dressed in.
Mm-hmm.
And she would just had impeccable manners and everything else. And she would visit with us, you know, and so on, and she spoke English. And she'd come and she'd ask us, she'd say, well, what did you do over the weekend? And, oh, God, we were everywhere, you know, and talk again. And say, well, we go to the Japanese dance halls, and Michiko would say, Japanese dance hall girl, no good. That's what she'd say. Because she was such a lady, and she was the colonel. She was the colonel's private secretary and everything of the base and everything, and everybody respected her and liked her. She was just, you know, funny little things like just illustrated there. Like she just had impeccable manners. She was just the perfect lady, you know. And she carried herself just that way too, you know, like. But
was she older than you then?
oh,
You think?
I would, yeah, like I was 19,
Yeah.
and I would say, yeah, she was probably well into her 20s or something like. She was a young lady.
Oh, still
And,
fairly young.
I
yeah.
don't recall that she was married or anything like that. The Japanese people were quite family oriented, and I don't recall that she was married or anything, but she would always be to work every single day, and her job was a colonel's secretary. That's who she worked for. And but we could all talk with her, and during a break time or something, I was in the supply room downstairs, you know, and I and another guy, Malcolm Logelman was his name. She would always come down and visit with us for a few minutes on her break and so on, and go to the mail. We had a big mail room there too for the whole base, and she'd just circulate around, you know, and she was a real nice lady was what she was, and she was probably in her 20s. And I was 19 when I was over there.
So how long were you in Japan?
Just about 6 months.
And then you went back to States?
Yeah, the way that happened, one day there, after I'd been there 6 months, word came down through all the various communication systems that I was to return to the United States on the first available transportation. And I didn't, so my mother used to write me a letter every single day I was in the service. Every day I would get a letter from my mother. And I was continuing to get these letters, you know, and so on. And then this word comes down. You have to adjust that a little bit.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Yep, you should be good now.
Okay. Well, then the word comes down that I'm to return to the United States on the first available transportation. And I couldn't figure out why is this? How come? What happened? And no word at all. Nobody knew anything. Just the direction was there that I was to return to the first available transportation. And the colonel said, well, John, he says you have to take the train up to Tokyo this afternoon. So get your gear all packed and everything. Be on that train. This is what my order says you're to do. So I go up to do that, get on, pack up, and say goodbye to all the guys. And you know, you've known these guys now for a few months. They were just like brothers to you.
I'm not sure.
Oh. Is that...
Oh, Alexa. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, we're good.
Yeah, Alexa's taking all this down too.
That was not my fault.
Yeah. But anyway, I go up to Tokyo, And I'm put up in this hotel right next to General MacArthur's headquarters. And his headquarters was in a very famous building there in Tokyo called the Daiichi Building. And I'm in this hotel right next to him, waiting for orders to be assigned to a flight to return to the States. So I was there for about 5 or 6 days. And every morning I could look down on that plaza to the Daiichi Building, just look right down on the scene there, and the Japanese people would be lined up there, lined up, by the hundreds. And MPs would be there patrolling the place, holding them back and everything. And MacArthur would come up in his limousine about 8 o'clock in the morning, and from his car walk into the Daiichi Building. And as he was walking in, the people would be cheering him and clapping and just messages of adoration toward him. And he'd walk in there. Then at 5 o'clock at night, the same scene would happen, where he would return to wherever he was staying. The limo would pull up and MacArthur would walk out, and the Japanese people again would be lined up every day. That was a ritual. All those 5 days I was there, they'd be cheering MacArthur. What?
Did you ever find out the background?
Well, it's just that he was such an admired person. He was a hero.
Huh.
He was a hero to the Japanese people. Like the Japanese people never knew what an 8-hour workday was and a 5-day work week. They just were working like fools all the time they were there. And MacArthur brought some social order to the country. And he was recognized not so much as a conqueror, but as a savior to the Japanese people.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they were just cheering him every day. They'd be down there cheering him. And of course, this was right after the war. I don't know how long that kept up, like 20 years or what, but or 5 years, because he was there, I don't know, 5 years. But at any rate, I was, that was a scene that I would look upon every day in this hotel that I was at. And then eventually I got my orders to go out to Atsugi Airfield, and I was assigned a flight to return to the United States. And that flight took off from Tokyo, and we flew to Guam. And Guam was straight south of Tokyo. And it took us 8 hours to get to Guam. It was about 1,600 miles. That'd be about like here to Kansas City or something like that. And it took us 8 hours to get there. They're all prop planes. And then the next flight was from Guam to Kwajalein, which was a little island only about a mile by mile, just enough for a landing strip.
Just big enough for an airport.
That's
for airplane.
Right, yeah. And that was a long flight from Guam to Kwajalein. And Kwajalein was one of the islands that saw quite a bit of the war. I mean, it was Japanese people or Japanese soldiers were quartered there and everything, and they had to be taken over to the war and everything. And then from Kwajalein we went to Johnston Island, which was another 8 hours away. And Johnston, the plane would just sit down there, and it had to be refueled and rechecked out and everything. These were the various steps that it went to. And then from Johnston we went up to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And then the longest flight was from Pearl Harbor to Hamilton Field in San Francisco. That was a 12-hour flight.
Do you remember what, any of those? So you said like the one island was war torn, but Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And
yeah, well,
Were there like obvious signs of?
No, no, see, that was 4 years later,
Okay.
41 to 45.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, see, so it was all, you know, it was pretty well civilized back in decent order and so on, all the buildings. You didn't see much war destruction. You saw war destruction in Japan,
Right.
like our base was all torn up, something terrible. But on these islands, as we came across, it's, you know, it's years later, and there wasn't much war damage that we could see at all. And then I never knew why I was going home, you know.
So you make it to San Francisco,
Right.
and all you know is somebody told you to go here, but you
Yeah,
still don't know.
and I don't know why I'm going. Yeah.
Wow.
So I call up my home, and my sister Lorinda answered the phone, and I said, well, what are you doing there? She never lived with us at all, but she was at the home there. And she said, well, haven't you heard? I said, no, I haven't heard anything. I don't know why I'm here at all. And she says, well, your mother died. And I said, for crying out loud, yeah, that's the first I learned while I was coming back, that my mother passed away. And she said that they arranged for you to get an emergency furlough. And so that's why, and then it took me another 2 days. I had to go by train then from San Francisco over to Kansas City, and then to Kansas City on our Great Western Railroad up to Owine. It took two to 3 days to do that. We had gone by train then. So that's why I came back, was somebody arranged, I think it was my uncle Clement, he was quite on the draft board and so on, and I think he arranged to have me flown back, but he should not have done that. There's nothing he could do anyway. But anyway, he did. And then I had a 30-day furlough in Owine there. And then I was reassigned to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. So after that, I jumped on a train and go into Chicago, and then go to another railroad station and get on a train that takes us all the way to Aberdeen Proving Ground. It went through Pittsburgh and most of the major cities in Indiana and Ohio. But anyway, it's the first time I'd ever been in that part of the country. I got off in Aberdeen Proving Ground, and then I was assigned as a supply sergeant to a training group there, training new recruits and so on at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And I did that for 6 months, and then I was discharged on October 12th, 1946. Yeah, 1946.
And then is that when you went into college at that point?
No, no. See, the school fall semester had already started.
Oh, sure, yeah, you would be
October.
in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I came back to Owine, and I took a route as a dry cleaning route person, where you go to all these little towns around Owine. You know, I had 3 different routes, and pick up dry cleaning and bring it back on Mondays and Thursdays I had a route, Tuesdays and Fridays I had a route, and Wednesdays and Fridays I had a route. Wednesdays and Saturdays, rather. Saturdays, 6 days a week, yeah. And I would pick up dry cleaning, deliver it back, and just keep on picking it up. It was just a rotation kind of business. Dry cleaning was pretty big in those days. And, you know, and I didn't have a salary. It was a commission job. And I just saved up money from commissions on it. I think I got 20% or something like that. And I saved up money, and then I went to college.
Okay.
In 1947.
And do you want to keep, we've been going for just a little over an hour. Do you want to take a quick break, or do you want to keep keep talking?
We might as well keep talking.
All right. I can talk with the best of them, Grandpa. So
Yeah, you sure can. Yeah,
so as long as you're okay.
I can keep babbling on.
Okay. And which college did you go to?
Well, I started out, I thought I would be interested in engineering,
Okay.
and I went to Iowa State.
Yep. In Ames, Iowa.
In Ames, yeah.
Yep.
And I got down there and got into those courses, and I just didn't like it at all.
And what kind of engineering would that have been
Well,
back
it would
then?
have been civil
Yeah.
engineering. And I didn't like the chemistry and the science and all that sort of thing that we were doing. And the lettering, I wasn't a good letter. You had to have impeccable printing in engineering, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just had to be impeccable. And so I just didn't like that at all. So after I was there for a couple of months, I finished out the semester, and I had passable grades. But then I thought, well, Omaha isn't just another 150 miles away. I think I'll apply at Creighton to their business school, for I sent to the literature to the College of Commerce. And they sent to me, so I applied there, and they took me in, and I just had a economics and finance education major at Creighton University.
And was that what the degree was called, or were those
Yeah.
two separate degrees?
No, they were economics and finance. It
Okay.
was together, yeah. I had both degrees, yeah. And I enjoyed that because I enjoyed economic issues, you know, like all the things that government does and everything, and I like economic subjects and
Where do you think
arguments and so on.
Where do you think that interest came from? Were you reading a lot of newspapers?
I think so.
And like maybe when you were on all those travels and all those train rides?
Yeah, I think that's part of it there too. And I always remember this, John, when we were back in high school, the Rotary Club or some fraternal club in Owine there asked all the students to write a paper of only 150 words on the subject of why national unity was important to my country. That was the subject. You had to write why national unity was important to my country. And I wrote a paper and I got first place. And this was between our two high schools in Owine.
So I'm not going to ask you to recount from memory all 150 words.
Yeah.
But do you remember a couple of the themes that you decided to write about?
Yeah, exactly. I think so. And basically, it was because we were coming up to World War II.
Right.
And the threats of Nazism in Germany, in Europe, and the coming of a war there, the fact that, hey, this is getting closer to our country, and we have to have a good national unity approach to this problem because it's a growing issue and it's getting closer to our shores. And you could just have it for 150 words, and why national unity is important to our country. And those were the kind of the themes I built the paper around. Is that, and I got first place. I still got the medal. I just looked at it the other day.
Really?
Yeah. The American Legion sponsored the thing. You know?
Okay.
And I got a medal for that at graduation. But I was always kind of interested in economic subjects, you know,
Yeah.
and what makes an economy run and turn and so on.
So in terms of economics, there's are you more interested in you know, how business and organizational changes will affect various things? Because there's economies of other areas now as well, right?
Yeah.
Like economies of human behavior and things.
Yeah, I was always interested in the business aspect of the economy. I really was, and the government side of it too. As a matter of fact, I took a course, a college course, government in business, and you just had to dealt with government's involvement in